Out of the 176 plants in Plants vs. Zombies 2, I'm sure there is at least one plant that you look at and go, why does this plant exist? Not in a wow, this plant is horribly balanced way, but in a if this plant was removed entirely, the game wouldn't be any different at all way. Admittedly, there are probably a lot of plants like this. A lot of people default to newer plants such as cediums or the premiums added after the end of adventure. However, there's a plant that's been in the game since its release that I feel deserves this role the most. This plant performs so poorly, is so utterly outclassed, and is so pointless that it's only remembered because of one incredibly niche interaction. That plant is Cabbage-pult. Cabbage-pult is one of the first plants you unlock in Plants vs. Zombies 2. As of the 7.1.1 version, it's the 5th tutorial plant. Before that though, it was unlockable after completing Ancient Egypt Day 2. It first appeared in PvZ1's roof section, and its name is a pun on the words cabbage and catapult, so it's pretty evident as to what it does. Cabbage-pult has a sun cost of 100 sun and a 5-second seed packet recharge. Its projectile does 40 damage per shot, and has a fire rate of once every 2.85 to 3 seconds. Yes, it varies. Most plants do, I don't know why this is. This means that its total damage per minute stat varies from, at worst, 800 damage per minute, and at best, 842.105 damage per minute. Its projectile always takes 1.2 seconds to hit the zombie it's targeting, no matter how far away it is. Its plant food fires a cabbage at every zombie on the lawn, and each cabbage does 200 damage. Overall, cabbage is a very basic plant. It's the 5th plant you unlock after all. This debate is as old as time itself. It's really hard to analyze Cabbage-pult without bringing up Peashooter at all, considering how similar they are. They have the exact same sun cost and recharge, essentially the same purpose, and very similar damage outputs. We already established Cabbage-pult's damage output earlier, that being a range from 800 damage per minute to 842.105 damage per minute. Well, Peashooter's is actually a bit different. It has an ever so slightly faster fire rate of every 1.35 seconds to 1.5 seconds, and does 20 damage per shot, giving it a total stat of 800 to 888.889 damage per minute. If Cabbage and Peashooter's damage outputs were the same, Cabbage would have a fire rate of once every 2.7 to 3 seconds. So from a damage perspective, Peashooter is slightly better on average. I'm also going to mention the projectile speed here. Unlike Cabbage, which arcs and always takes 1.2 seconds to hit a zombie, and travels at one tile every 0.192 seconds. This gives Peashooter the edge in projectile speed at almost every range, only being worse when the zombie is at least 7 columns or more away. Projectile speed doesn't really show up when it comes to damage output itself, so let's look at some time to kill stats. Time to kill is exactly what it sounds like. What was calculated here was the amount of time that it takes a single plant to kill a buckethead zombie from 0 to 8 tiles away. On this table, the green is the best possible time, the black is the average time, and the red is the worst possible time. As we can see here, on average, despite the fact that it takes longer to hit zombies around 7 or 8 tiles away, Peashooter still wins in all of these categories. Now, Cabbage can theoretically kill a buckethead faster, but that's only if you have the worst possible RNG with Peashooter. Obviously, you won't have only one plant and the zombie won't be static, but it's the best way that I know of to show damage potential. Peashooter also has a different plant food, that being that it fires a barrage of peas for a total of 1200 damage. Unlike Cabbage, it only hits zombies in its lane. The argument for which plant food is better depends on the situation, as both have their ups and downs and really aren't all too similar. Personally, I believe Peashooter's plant food is more effective overall due to the amount of zombies in the game that are really bulky, but I digress. Peashooter in general is a much better pick statistically, and I haven't even mentioned how it combos with not only Torchwood, but other newer plants like Peavine. When it comes to raw damage output, you're much better off going with Peashooter. Let's be real, there aren't many positives to using Cabbage-pult. Even ignoring the stats, this plant just isn't great at dealing with anything. Due to Cabbage being a catapult and always having a set projectile speed, it makes it a lot harder to quickly kill off zombies, especially at close range. If you're ever using catapult plants, please put them behind your sun producers. You'll be saving yourself a lot of trouble. Due to Cabbage not firing straight too, it can completely miss its shots against faster zombies, and especially suffers against ones like Chicken, Weasel, and Newspaper Zombie. This is more of an issue with lobbing plants in general, but Cabbage is especially hurt by this because of how it has no splash damage, unlike the good majority of lobbers. Cabbage also has no real synergy with any other plants. Yes, it works well with walls, but every attacking plant works well with walls. There's armament too, but almost every plant is in a class and has a mint that corresponds to it. Sorry, Lilypad. The only zombie where using Cabbage over a straight shooter is probably a good idea is against Barrel Roller Zombie. Snorkel zombies are also mentioned quite a bit, but that's only if you have absolutely no access to walls, stalls, or insta-kills. There's also Excavator, but Parasol completely cancels that out. Well, where is Cabbage-pult good, then? Player's House, Day 5. If you want to make literally the first level in the game, unless you play through the first 4 levels of the tutorial, a level in which there are a total of 3 waves of zombies, a little bit easier, you use Cabbage-pult. Why? Because of the graves. I did another Google forum for this video asking what people's thoughts on Cabbage-pult were, and I kid you not, 24 out of the 30 responses in the positive section mentioned that it lobs over graves. A lot of them only mention that. Of course, there are graves throughout the entirety of Ancient Egypt, but you unlock Bloomerang after beating Day 3, a level before graves even show up in modern versions, and Gravebuster just a few levels later. When it comes to graves outside of Ancient Egypt, in Dark Ages, Night is way too tanky for Cabbage, and Jester completely cucks your shots anyway. In modern day, they barely exist, and in the levels with graves, other counters to Cabbage are in those levels. Lobbing over grid items isn't always a good thing either. In a lot of cases, this is actually more of a downside than a benefit. For example, catapulting over Octozombies' octopi makes it a lot harder to actually deal with Octo, because he'll just throw more octopi at your plants, ultimately disabling your entire lawn. You can't destroy the octopi unless there's nothing else in the lane, so it's a lot better to bring something that actually deals with them. Firing over both Arcade Zombies Arcade and Importers Tents leads to similar issues. They're a constant stream of zombies you can't do anything with because of how Cabbage simply doesn't target them. Not to mention, there are dozens of other lobbing, piercing, or splash plants that do what Cabbage-pult does in ignoring grid items, but improve on it in some way. There's also the fact that the one thing Cabbage is known for, that being Ancient Egypt's graves, is literally just destroyable with the Zero Sun Gravebuster. Being completely outclassed by literally every other plant in the game only adds insult to injury, and it's just depressing. One response in the Google forum expresses this perfectly. I don't think there's much room for improvement, unlike some other plants, and even if they give it a lot of damage like in the PvZ3 beta, people still won't use it because of better alternatives. I feel like there's so much Cabbage-pult slander in the Google forum that I could recreate half of the entire script using only words from the responses. Let me go over some. At the start of the game, it's outclassed by the first plant you have access to, which is a feat. I didn't even use it in the tutorial level it's featured in. In late game, there are so many better lobbing plants like the Kernel or Winter Melon, it falls off as soon as you have access to it. If there were no graves in Ancient Egypt, Cabbage-pult would have 0 reasons to exist in the first place, since it doesn't counter anything else in that world. Even in Ancient Egypt, where its ability to skip graves is significant, you could instead be using the graves to stall out waves. As waves only progress if you deal damage to zombies, they can be used to build up an offense without causing more zombies to spawn. Slow fire rate deals awfully with crowds. Was introduced to deal with tombstones, but the player is given Bloomerang immediately afterwards, which renders it useless. It's a plant you get and never use ever again, because it's completely outclassed by everything else. It is statistically worse than Peashooter, which I find both hilarious and sad for a plant unlocked outside of the tutorial on most versions of PvZ2. It can't attack zombies such as Parasol and Jesters, sluggish fire rate, and is generally outclassed by most attackers and lobbers. I feel like Cabbage is a good idea on paper, a plant which can lob over obstacles for a cheap price. It sadly isn't good in practice, as it is too slow to even compete with other cheap single targets like Peashooter. It is generally just a bad pick in your seed slot, as everything that Cabbage-pult can do, other lobbing plants do way better. I think it's a real shame with what happened to Cabbage-pult. People like to write it off as, oh, cabbage is a tutorial plant, so it's understandable that it sucks. Well, the tutorial plants don't suck. All are very effective in what they do, even Peashooter to some extent. Cabbage, while still being able to get the job done, struggles a lot. And I mean it when I say he struggles a lot. There's a trend I haven't talked about at all regarding how PvZ1 plants typically aren't great in games outside of PvZ1. Plants like Magnetrume, whom I just made a video on, and Cabbage-pult, a plant you're literally watching a video about right now, are both great examples of this. I'm not going to go too in depth on this idea right now because that's probably a discussion for a later video. I truly see no potential in Cabbage-pult. PvZ2's meta plays a large part in Cabbage's uselessness, but its stats are pretty awful too. If you consider Cabbage to be the worst plant in the game, I wouldn't necessarily disagree. There's a legitimate argument for it. Maybe I'm missing something and Cabbage is secretly really good, but I don't see how it's anywhere outside of a top 5 worst plants discussion. Let's be real though, the true reason Cabbage-pult is so bad is because of how it looks like this, and not like this. Thanks for watching.